Hello, marketing types. Welcome to the new distance learning reality that we're all in. I hope you're all safe, and I hope you're all doing what you need to do to keep other people safe. I'm praying for you guys, and I'm sure we'll get through all of this together. So I wanted to just take a minute and do a screencast. I'm hoping to do more of these to help you through the material, but I thought I would start with something that we've already covered, so that these ideas might be at least a little bit fresh in your mind. So I'm going to deal with the first part of chapter 2, which you did an assignment or two on before the break. And the topic is consumer demand, and it's section 2.1. It begins on page 37 of the textbook, so you can follow along if you have your textbook. If you don't have your textbook, I've scanned the pages of the text for chapter 2, and I've posted them on chapter 2 in subfolders. So you can look up each section of chapter 2 and find the textbook pages there. So you can read your text even if you don't have your text. So good, that should be easy, right? Let's get going. Let's talk a little bit, review a little bit about consumer demand. So I'm going to deal with the key ideas in this section, and I'll deal with them in the order that they occur and just give you some explanation here. So the first thing that it talks about is what a consumer is, which seems important. Consumer demand, consumer. A consumer, according to the textbook, is a person who uses a product. Okay, so they're the guy who wears the basketball, or girl who wears the basketball shoes and plays basketball. The person who drives the car that was purchased. The person who works out at the gym, for which there is a membership. The customer, on the other hand, is a person who buys the product. So you can buy a product and not actually use it. So a parent could buy a child a gift. I bought my daughter a Google Home Mini for Christmas, and she uses it. I don't use it, but I bought it. So I'm the customer, but she would be the consumer in that case. A related concept the book talks about are gatekeepers. And a gatekeeper is a person who oversees the care of another. So an obvious example of this would be a parent who buys things for a child, especially a young child. They buy their food, their clothing, they buy pretty much everything. Well, they buy everything that the kid would use, because a 4-year-old doesn't generally have a bank account or a credit card or anything like that. So that'd be a gatekeeper. But a gatekeeper could also be an adult who's looking after an elderly parent who's in a senior's home, or who is somehow unable to get out of the house or function well enough to buy things for themselves. But gatekeepers could also be teachers buying things for their students, companies buying things for their employees. Anyone who oversees the care of another or provides for another in some way could be considered a gatekeeper. The next concept they deal with are needs, and these are all related again to consumer demand, right? How does our demand for products and services work in the marketing world? Well, one of the things that you need to know, in addition to being what a consumer is, what a customer is, what a gatekeeper is that all human beings have 4 basic needs. They are food. Obviously, we don't eat, we die, and of course included in that would be water. The second one is protection, and protection could be something obvious, like we need to know we can walk down the street without being murdered or robbed or whatever, and so we have police and things for that. But protection could also be things like clothing that protect. Clothing protects us from the elements. It could be housing. Shelter is an important type of protection. So we all need those things. We also need affection and companionship. We're social beings. God created us to have a relationship with Him, but He also created us to have relationships with each other. So affection is important. And the final one is belonging and purpose. And by that, I think what they mean is we need a reason to get out of bed in the morning. We need things in our life that excite us, things that make our lives enjoyable, things that give our lives meaning, that make us think, yeah, I'm doing something that matters. I'm not just wandering around aimlessly. So we need food, we need protection, we need affection, and we need purpose. Those are our needs. Related to needs, and maybe more important for marketing, are wants. And wants are things that aren't necessary to our survival. So we don't need them or we'll die. They're things we just want. They make our lives fun, they make it exciting, they make it easier, they make it more efficient, those kinds of things. They're things we want but don't need. And marketing focuses mainly on our wants. And what it's trying to do is change our wants. right? It wants us to change our wants so that we'll want whatever product or service is being marketed. And marketing and wants, do change, and they vary. And there's several factors that affect the way that our wants change and vary. So one of them is geography. So where you live shapes the kinds of things that you want, right? Um, you know, uh, People that live in South America want different types of food, for example, than people that live in Canada. And that changes from country to country. Another factor is affluence or economics. And you can think of this as just how much money we have, right? So you as a person have a certain amount of money. Well, that's going to affect the things that you want and the things that you're able to get, right? So, you know, uh, if you're wealthy, then you might want a BMW or a Tesla or a Ferrari if you've got that much money. But the average person doesn't really want those things in any real usable way because they know they'll never be able to afford them. Similarly, poorer people, people with less money, right? They're not going to want expensive things, and wealthy people aren't going to want things that are cheaper. They're going to want better things, more expensive clothes, etc. And then finally, culture will change what we want, right? So different cultural values, different cultural practices, different, right? They're going to affect what we want. So for example, in India, there's not much demand for beef because most people don't eat it for religious reasons. For example, another example is in California, they don't sell a lot of snowmobiles, right? Because there just isn't a lot of snow. So our culture will change the things that we might want. In North America, and really in the Western world, so Europe, North America, etc., consumer demand is driven really by wants and not so much by needs. Because when you have the money available to provide for your needs, food, shelter, clothing, etc., then you turn to spending your money on wants. And in North America, that's the case. So marketing is really focused on wants. What do we want, and how do marketers get us to buy or to fulfill our wants by buying their products and services? So something to recall from last chapter is we talked about the value equation, right? And the value equation is basically the process a person goes through before they decide to buy a product or a service. They evaluate all the benefits that they'll get from that particular product or service, and then they think about all the things that it will cost. And costs could be money, obviously, but also time, convenience, pleasure, things like that. So that's the value equation. And basically the way it works is you add up all the benefits, all the things you can gain from something, a product, and then you subtract what it costs you to get those benefits. And what it equals is a positive or a negative number. If the number is positive, you're likely to buy that product. If it's negative, you probably won't. So if you recall, we did an exercise with this last chapter, and it looked like this, where I was going to buy a golf membership at Peterborough Golf and Country Club, and so I created a cost-benefit analysis. On the left are all the benefits that I would get, and I assigned values to each one. And then on the right, I put the costs. The biggest one, of course, being the plus $5,000+ a year. And then I assign values to the other costs: time away from family, not being able to play with my usual golfing buddies, and then the pressure to play a lot of golf in order to make it pay off. And in the end, what I got was a total to which I could apply the value equation. So my benefits added up to 16. The costs added up to 19. And so the net result was -3. And according to the theory, this would mean I would be unlikely to purchase this product. And as it turns out, I didn't purchase the product precisely for this reason. I didn't think that the benefits were good enough to justify the costs that I would have to pay, essentially, to get the membership. Now, in terms of demand, these things change. Our wants change, and they change according to three main factors. They change according to economic shifts, they change according to employment trends, and they change according to changes in perceived value. So economic shifts is changes in our economy. So for example, the price of gas goes way up, right? And so our wants to travel might go down. The amount of time we spend touring around in our cars for no particular reason would go down. So we would have less of a demand for gasoline because we didn't want to pay the extra amount to do what we wanted with it. So would be an economic shift. Employment trends, you could lose your job, in which case you're focusing on getting food, shelter, clothing, your needs, and you're less focused on your wants. So, similarly, if all of a sudden there's an employment boom and an area is quite wealthy, then they might buy more expensive things and more of them, right? So demands change based on employment. And then the last one is a bit more interesting and a little trickier, and that's changes in perceived value. So, for example, if a product is seen as, good but not great, then, they'll get a number of people to buy it, and it'll probably do okay. If they can somehow change the way that people look at the value of their product, then they can get more people to buy it. So marketers are always trying to get people to think of their product as somehow more valuable, right? So for example, Vans, shoes, for example, they used to be, valuable mostly to just skaters and people in a certain cultural subgroup, right? And they've worked hard to market their shoes as everyday type of shoes. I have at least 2 pairs of Vans. My wife wears Vans, and we're in our 50s. Our perception of the value of Vans has been changed mostly by van marketing, right? So now we're buying their shoes. So if you can change the way people look at the value of your product, they'll buy it, right? Again, Nike shoes, right? When they first came on the market, nobody really knew who they were, but they've created this idea that their shoes are really, really, really good. And so they can get all kinds of people to go out and shell out $300 or $400 for a pair of basketball shoes. That is a change in perceived value that increases people's desire, demand. So just if you want a definition of perceived value, you could define it like this. It's what the consumer or the customer thinks a product or a service is worth. So to sum it all up, the purpose of this is to get you to realize that you have to, as a marketer, you have to gauge how consumers will change their wants based on the way the world goes and all the things that I've mentioned, right? And then also you want to know how it's going to change over time. So my demands when I was 20 are very different than when I'm 50. So you're looking at, how does the population age, right? Are you dealing in an area where people are older, or are you dealing in an area where you have a lot of college students? And then as that area changes over time, you have to think about that in terms of marketing, right? It's essential to good marketing to know your customers' wants and their demands for products and how those demands change. All the best. Be safe. Talk to you soon.